Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. In an article for The Hindu last week, India's former Vice President and a former ambassador to Afghanistan suggests that neutrality could be the best option for Afghanistan. But what would neutrality amount to? Why is it the best option for the country? And how would it tackle all the other problems the world has with the Taliban? Those are the three issues I shall put today to India's former Vice President, Hamid Ansari. Mr. Ansari, let's start with that critical question. In the article you wrote for The Hindu, you suggested that neutrality could be the best option for Afghanistan. Let me ask, what would neutrality amount to, and why is it the best option for the country?
Two reasons. What neutrality amounts to is a formal declaration by all concerned, starting with the Afghans themselves, but also including the rest of the global community, that Afghanistan shall be treated as a neutral state. And that's a term which has been defined again and again, starting with the Hague Convention of 1907, but more recently it was done in the case of Austria, it was done in the case of Turkmenistan. It was also done for Laos, which didn't work. But Austria and Turkmenistan did work, which means that everybody commits, internally in Afghanistan and externally in the rest of the world, that this shall be treated as a neutral state. What the right Persian expression is betarfi, not taking sides.
Just to interrupt, so neutrality for Afghanistan would mean an official declaration by Afghanistan and recognition by the world as well that Afghanistan will not be involved in any other country's disputes or wars.
Precisely. Something that Afghanistan has by and large practiced in recent decades. I mean, in Indo-Pak wars, different wars, Afghans have kept a certain distance, despite very close relationship with India in particular.
In fact, you make this point in your article. You say it is on record that Afghan governments practiced neutralism, and you define it as military non-alignment since King Nadir Shah's pronouncement in 1931. And this was the policy, you say, right through the Second World War.
That's right.
Through the Indo-Pak wars of 65 and 71, and even the Kargil War.
Although, particularly during Second World War, efforts were made by the two contestants to somehow rope in Afghanistan directly or indirectly.
Which Afghanistan resisted.
Which Afghanistan by and large resisted, depending on the power of the government of the day.
So you're making 2 points, aren't you? One, Afghanistan has a fairly long history, and it's not so far in the past, of having practiced neutralism. And secondly, this stood Afghanistan in good stead.
Very much so. Because what is the option? If they get involved in local disputes, and Afghanistan is a country which is surrounded by so many other countries, then there's no end to it. Then you will have factionalism within the country in addition to factionalism which exists for other reasons, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the only way for the Afghans is, what is the need today in Afghanistan? Dire economic consequences, support of the external world. Their assets are frozen, they are not getting food aid, they are not getting a lot of other assistance, which, I think as much as 70% of the Afghan GDP before the...
came from abroad as aid, which is now stopped.
Which is all
So
stopped.
what you're saying is neutralism would make Afghanistan more acceptable because it would remove it from the rivalries and animosities of not just the politics of the neighborhood, but also international politics.
Yes, an Afghan academic who's teaching in Australia used a term, says don't move away from being a rentier state. I mean, you are rented by one side or the other, in some form or the other.
Neutralism would ensure that Afghanistan can establish its own identity and not be a rentier state for others. Would this neutralism therefore be akin to the Swiss policy of neutrality?
Superb example. It's been there for several centuries now. The Swiss do not get involved in other people's conflicts, and the best example is World War I and World War II.
So you're saying Afghanistan should become the Switzerland
Ideally.
of South Asia?
Ideally. I mean, it may not be quite as good as Switzerland.
But in terms of neutrality?
Neutrality, it can. And next door to them is Turkmenistan, which is very recent, but it has been endorsed by all concerned and practiced by the country concerned.
Now the key question is, will Afghanistan's immediate neighbors accept and adhere to and recognize Afghan neutrality? I suppose, and you point this out very honestly in your article, the key concern is Pakistan. And that's because Pakistan has a long lingering dispute over the Durand Line.
You see, one of the requirements of effective neutrality is that you find a way of containing or eliminating altogether boundary disputes. In the case of Pakistan, there is a boundary dispute. I mean, in the case of Afghanistan, there is a boundary dispute with Pakistan. And that will have to be somehow resolved. I gave an example from somebody as important as a former foreign secretary of Pakistan.
Riaz Muhammad Khan.
Riaz Muhammad Khan, in his book, he has talked about it. He says, look, we cannot undo it, we cannot do it. So let's find something in between the two.
Let me quote what Riaz Muhammad Khan said. It was in your article and I've written it down. He's basically suggesting that Pakistan and Afghanistan need to learn to live with the Durand Line without Afghanistan officially recognizing it as a border, but Pakistan will nonetheless consider it the border. His words are, it would be as futile for Pakistan to push Kabul for formal recognition of the Durand Line as it is for Kabul to reopen the issue whose parameters it has never been able to define.
Correct.
And he says, Kabul should therefore continue to respect the Durand Line as the functional border, which for Pakistan remains the historical and legal border.
Which is what it is at the moment, which has been there for many years.
This is a very emotional dispute because the Pashtun population live on either side. Will Afghanistan be able to accept this? It's very easy for Pakistan to accept this because Pakistan is getting recognition of its claim this is the historical legal border. Afghanistan, on the other hand, is having to give up its claim that this is not the legal border and instead accept it as a functional one. Will the Afghans accept?
You see, this is all the leftover of colonialism. There are these famous or infamous lines, the Durand Line and the McMahon Line and this line and that line, which were in a sense imposed by the colonial powers.
And the Afghans never accepted it.
Well,
from Abdur Rahman onwards.
Well, yes, they didn't accept it, but they accepted it because it was in return for something else. And it was
what would the return for something else be now at this point of time?
Well, most obvious, the badly needed assistance, international recognition, and you see, several things are being mixed up at the moment. I mean, one is the nature of the government at the moment. I mean, post...
recognition of the Taliban.
Recognition of Taliban and Taliban, whatever their policies represent.
And the other is the dire economic and humanitarian condition of the country.
Country is starving. There was a documentary the other day, I think it was in one of the international channels, probably the BBC. I mean, they're dying, absolutely.
And you're saying this, and I'm putting it in quotations, compromise by the Afghans that we'll accept the Durand Line as the functional border, even if we don't accept it as a historical one, will lead to acceptance of Afghan neutrality, which in turn, you hope, will lead to, firstly, the aid Afghanistan badly needs, and secondly, to the recognition that it's craving for.
Precisely.
So the starting point would be neutrality, and to get that neutrality from the critical neighbor Pakistan is your compromise acceptance of the Durand Line, not as a legal border, but as a functional one.
Because this is what they have actually practiced. They have not formally accepted, but they have practiced.
The whole thing hinges on the Taliban accepting the logic and the need for this compromise. What's your feeling?
Well, it has been reported, I do not have first-hand evidence, it has been reported that in the Doha discussions, which were over a longish period of time between the Americans and the Taliban, the Americans mentioned some form of neutrality and the Taliban never resisted it.
They didn't demur.
They didn't demur, they didn't say no to it, they were not...
But is that acceptance?
It is not, but you see, this will have to be put across to them in lieu of.
And persuaded.
And persuaded. You see, the choice is, what is the choice? The next 2 months, if they don't get external assistance, half the country will starve.
But you see, Afghanistan has a small tradition of being somewhat allergic also to neutrality. Clearly, under King Nadir Shah and Zahir Shah, neutrality was the policy of the country. But when the Mujahideen came to power, they had doubts about it, and Hamid Karzai had doubts. This is what you write.
Yeah.
Neutrality was aired but not welcomed by the Mujahideen, and even later President Hamid Karzai was not receptive. So the great tradition of neutrality which served the Afghans for 50, 60 years ended somewhere in early 1990 when the Mujahideen came to power. Thereafter, Afghan governments have had qualms and doubts about it. Won't that continue? Are you confident the Taliban can be persuaded?
Those doubts were voiced first after the Soviet invasion. Lord Carrington, who was British Foreign Secretary, he had talked of some form of neutrality. And at that point of time, the Mujahideen leaders in exile reacted very strongly to it because they translated neutrality into a simplistic term, na-mardi.
Which sounds unmanly.
Unmanliness. But the point is that there is no choice.
And you believe that the Taliban can be persuaded, particularly if they realize that neutrality will lead not only to a better relationship with Pakistan because the Durand Line issue will have been not resolved but at least put on the side, but it will then lead to the assistance they need for humanitarian purposes and in due course probably to the recognition they crave for. If that's convincing for them, they could agree to neutrality.
Well, look at it this way. Pakistan's resistance to Afghan postures has always varied with the political situation. Pakistan assisted the Mujahideen, Pakistan assisted the Taliban, notwithstanding the suspected perceptions that they may have on the border. Because it's a very unusual kind of...
So you're suggesting that this acceptance of neutrality by Afghanistan could also work to make Pakistan accept it, and because Pakistan realized it would put Pakistan in a better position internationally.
Well, Pakistan does require a better position internationally.
And this would help.
This would help. And the instrument for doing it is, I mean, apart from Afghan formal declaration, acceptance by the Big Five and acceptance by the Security Council.
Absolutely.
And the UN General Assembly.
In fact, that's the point I wanted to come to next. You write in your article that neutrality comprises certain essential ingredients.
Yes.
And these are a constitutional declaration by Afghanistan,
Right.
legally binding declarations by all its neighbors,
Right.
a UN Security Council declaration refraining from any form of power politics in Afghanistan, and finally, a UN General Assembly resolution recognizing Afghanistan as a neutral state. These are all critical, you believe?
These are absolutely critical. Go back a little in history. Lord Curzon, he said, Afghanistan is the chessboard for dominating the world. Now, the Tsarist Russia was playing the same game. And therefore, willy-nilly, what Amir Abdul Rahman Khan said about the Russians, he said more or less the same thing about other neighbor, Imperial Britain. So, let them negate each other.
In other words, Afghanistan has to stop being the chessboard on which the great game is played. And that will only happen if this procedure of binding declarations by its neighbors, a constitutional declaration by Afghanistan, resolutions by the Security Council and the General Assembly all happen.
Precisely. And it has to happen together. It doesn't mean that you do one where...
It has to be sequenced.
It must be.
Many people will ask the question, neutrality may well end up serving Afghanistan's purposes and particularly the Taliban government's purposes because you believe it will lead to the aid they need and it should lead to the recognition internationally they crave for. Right. But what about the Western world? In fact, the democratic world, which includes India, they have concerns about the Taliban. I'm talking specifically about the Taliban's religious bigotry, I'm talking about its dismissive, discriminatory attitude to women. I'm talking of its unfair treatment of other Afghan ethnicities, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras. How will neutrality ensure that these concerns, which are dominant concerns, are resolved?
No, they will not be pre-resolved. But there is a process of acceptance of harsh realities. Now, we have been through this game with other countries. Treatment of women. We go back 20 years, 30 years. What was the treatment of women in certain Arab countries? I won't name them. You see? Similarly, other forms of treatment, undemocratic governance, for example.
Or religious bigotry.
It
occurred in Arab countries too.
Even a country like next door neighbor, like Turkmenistan, by common consent, it's a very harsh government in domestic terms.
So you're saying, by implication, that just as the world over time, 20, 30 years, has learned to live with the discrimination in Arab countries, the bigotry in Arab countries, and that discrimination and that bigotry has also come down very considerably. But similarly, a similar process will have to apply to Afghanistan. We'll have to learn to live with it. Afghanistan over 20, 30 years may change its attitude and may ameliorate its policies, but this is not something that you can impose as a change because those are internal issues.
We cannot make that a precondition. I mean, look at the great powers in the world. Again, do they practice democracy as is understood in the Western world?
They're often hypocritical, but you're asking them here to stop being hypocritical, and that's very difficult for great powers to stop doing. But more importantly, you're saying to them, give up the very public concerns that you've yourself made preconditions, right? And now accept that you have to learn to live with them, provided Afghanistan guarantees neutrality, opts out of being the chessboard for the great big game, and in return, give Afghanistan time to change its attitude in terms of bigotry, women, and the ethnic minorities.
Why? Because the needs of Afghanistan, the dire economic
so great.
and human needs are such that they have to take precedence over everything else.
I'll come to those dire needs in a moment's time, but one more question. Do you think, A, the Western world, the big powers, the P5, are willing to accept this? And B, what about the neighbors surrounding Afghanistan? Are they willing to accept it? What's your hunch? What's your feeling?
I think it is doable. I think it is doable for the simple reason that Afghanistan, after decades of war and conflict, is in need of peace. Peace so that people can simply survive, not...
In other words, acceptance of the dire situation of Afghanistan should be sufficient to convince not just its neighbors but the big P5 that, look, we have to accept this because otherwise there's no way of resolving the dire problem and millions will die.
That's it.
Let's then at this point come to that bigger, wider problem. The BBC says that perhaps half the country is short of food. Perhaps 2 million children could starve.
Yes.
The UN World Food Programme has gone actually one critical step further. They believe that 1 million kids could die this winter. We're staring at a catastrophe.
We are, absolutely. Because all the aid that came from the outside world, including from our own country, in very substantial measure, has stopped. I mean, we had this tussle with Pakistan, which mercifully has been resolved now, of our food aid going through Pakistan into Afghanistan.
They've agreed that they will let it go, but it hasn't gone. And weeks could pass before it does.
Hopefully, it will go through.
The United Nations in its most recent conference announced that the pledges they wanted of up to 600 million have been received. You've been India's permanent representative at the UN. How much of a time lag is there between countries pledging to give aid and that aid actually coming? Because till the aid actually comes, the food won't go to Kabul.
The less said about that, the better.
So in other words, although people are awakening and promising money, which is what pledges are, actual action is still unforeseeable. We don't know when it will happen.
You see, these are all pressure tactics. You dangle aid, and then it's not accepted yet. So asking the recipient to make this gesture, that gesture, It's a game which will go on. It is a political
But in the
game.
meantime, the dire situation in Afghanistan is getting
worsen.
worse with every single day.
Absolutely, every hour.
And it's in the realization that Afghanistan is at a disaster point that the world needs to accept, look, we need to set in motion a process that will help the Afghans and help us help the Afghans. And that process starts with neutrality.
Exactly. And also that while we may have certain good reasons for having a certain attitude towards the Taliban, we must not forget that Taliban today are not the Taliban of 20 years ago.
And also not forget that regardless of the Taliban, there are 24 million Afghans who could be dying of hunger.
And those deaths would be amongst them also.
Two last questions. You're a former ambassador to Afghanistan. You were there in the last years of the Najibullah regime. You're also well aware of India's enormous stakes in Afghanistan and how important it is to us. Did the government make a mistake pulling out its ambassador and diplomats and closing the embassy in August?
I think I and another former colleague are both on record as having said that it was unnecessary. And I've cited in this article what was our attitude when the first government came in. That was in early 90s. We did not pull out our ambassador. We did not pull out
Vijay Nambiar continued there, and I remember visiting Afghanistan and he was there and functioning.
Not only that, even, you see, what were the critical ingredients of our aid? There were medical people. There were people working on projects. We let them be there. So, you see, the point is there is always an element of political judgment. Do you do it? Do you not do it? How do you do it?
The wrong judgment call was made this time.
Perhaps. Perhaps. I am nowhere near.
But you're saying that pulling out the mission and pulling out the ambassador was wrong.
I would say that unless the government had some information which government has not shared with the public, that there was actually an imminent threat to the physical safety.
So you're also saying that if there was an imminent threat to the physical safety, we should be told about it, therefore, to justify the decision.
There should have been some inkling of it. You see, I give you an example. When I went to Kabul, first week of April 1989, the Battle of Jalalabad was on. My instructions on departure from Delhi were, your mission has been cut down to the bone. Your instructions are to go and destroy all papers and be ready to leave at very short notice. So even that situation was faced. It was faced then. It was faced when Ambassador Nambiar was there, and it was faced this time.
So you are agreed that in the absence of an imminent threat about which we have not been told anything at all, it was a mistake to close down the mission.
It was a certain misapprehension about what the Taliban would do.
And therefore a mistake. I'm just pushing you to say it was a mistake.
Well, you could come to that conclusion.
Okay, it was a mistake. Last week, talking about the Taliban, the present Foreign Secretary said, and I'm quoting him, they want us to re-establish our embassy there. Should we do it as soon as possible?
I would say yes.
As quickly as possible?
Unquestionably, yes. You see, I'll give you an example. At the beginning of September, the Civil Aviation Authority of Afghanistan sent a message to our Civil Aviation Authority saying that people are stranded, please resume civil aviation. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and that is dependent on what I read in the newspapers, there was no reply sent.
Or if there was, we don't know about it.
Well, there was no resumption. The answer would have been a positive answer or a no answer.
I'm going to end at this point, but I'm just underlining for the audience. You do believe that it was a mistake to shut the mission in August. And when I asked you, should we respond to the Taliban who apparently said, reopen your mission, your answer is unquestionably yes. It was a mistake to shut down. Now open as quickly as you can.
Are we not in contact with the Taliban? Whether it was in Doha or elsewhere. So if we are, that means this is a pure formality. We do want to talk to them because they are the actual government.
Absolutely. And the sooner we open the mission, the better for India, the better for the Afghan people, the better for the neighborhood. I thank you, Mr. Ansari, for this interview. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.